Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Now, if you're among the 1% or so who watch us on video as we record these things, rather than the 99% who only hear the audio, you may be a little bit confused today. You may wonder, did you screw up? Are you to blame for, catching us on the wrong day or whatever? And actually, you haven't, because we kind of shifted the schedule around a bit. So instead of Joel and I recording on Tuesday nights, we're going to record on Monday nights, which means I'm actually doing 2 shows on Mondays. I just finished one 3 hours ago with Anne Marie and special guest June Edward, who was on with us earlier today. And now we're doing the one with Joel. So no blame involved, no shame if you missed the show being recorded. It's just that we decided to kind of switch things around, mainly so I could have more time on Tuesdays to do some other stuff. So that's what's going on there. But Joel, we're going to keep on doing what we normally do anyway. We're just doing it on a different day, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That's what changes.
Yeah. Yes.
So because that's what we do.
That's what we do. Absolutely.
That's what we do. And once again, I got a topic off of your page. You posted something about blame, which that's actually been a concept that's been on my mind off and on for the past few months, both here on the show and in my personal private life. In that it really has become very, very evident to me just how useless that emotion is. It really doesn't do much of anything good for us. The only thing I can I try to find, what can I appreciate about everything, including the most dire, volatile, horrible, terrible stuff that goes on in life. And the one thing I can think of that's useful where blame is concerned is that it's a great way to point out to us that's not where we want to go. That's about the best one I come up. Have you come up with a better one? I don't know.
Well, I think blame, the initial phase of blame, or like what I call origin discovery, if something happens, somebody wrongs you, it is helpful to understand, what that did to you. Like, the concept of, hey, this person, when I was younger, my mom, was very anxious, and she exposed me to a bunch of anxiety. She worried about everything. So when I had an anxiety brain, so blame, or in this case, again, origin discovery, is a process where I can say, okay, that's where that came from. My mom didn't mean to harm me. She didn't mean to. She was, she grew up in an incredibly toxic situation herself, and she dealt with in her entire life. She dealt with unbelievable anxiety. So I don't hold her in blame, but the original blame, or the origins of this started, at least in my life, with her, and in her life it started with her mother. If we look at all that, the problem that I have with blame is, blame puts you in a victim mindset. I have worked with clients for years that my parents did this wrong, and my family did this wrong, and it isn't that they're wrong and they're blamed. But at what point are we going to accept responsibility for the condition today? And right. Unfortunately, my opinion of traditional therapy, traditional psychology, and how therapists handle this, somehow blame and trauma and being sort of stuck in that kind of mindset is sort of, it's almost like, well, nothing is your fault because this happened. And if nothing's your fault because this happened, then you really can't help it because it's somebody else's fault. So blame, in a sense, almost renders you to believe, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It's not my job to fix it. But the problem is there's nobody else that's going to fix this. And you see these cycles of societal blame and cultural blaming, and I have there's just a lot going on. I'm not about, as you know, I am not about anybody harming anybody or any of those things, but there's the radical responsibility of self-responsibility, radical acceptance. You get to a place where blame serves it helps in identifying, this is what happened. But from that point on, it becomes your responsibility to fix you, regardless of the origins of where this came from. And that's a hard message for people. Like I'll hear often, well, Joel, you're blaming the victim. And I'm not
Mm.
blaming the victim at all. I'm helping the person who was victimized get out of the victim mindset by accepting this horrible stuff happened. And it is now up to us, you and me, to work together and figure out a way where this doesn't take over your life, or you're allowing this to go forever and ever. And there was one of my cases years ago, and this is before I was in life coaching, and I was a manager of residential group homes and
Hmm.
for emotionally handicapped kids. And it was, it was not a fun place. I enjoyed
Right.
it, but it was not, to be honest with you, what we were doing wasn't, in my mind, very therapeutic. It was more of like herding sheep and trying to, get everybody there and in one place. And so there's one young man in particular, and he had been horribly abused for years by a priest, a Catholic priest.
Mm.
I want
Oh,
to make sure I say that. And he was, and really just obscene stuff happened to him when he was a child. And so he was, once that was discovered, he was taken from their care and he ended up in our home. And so he would go to therapy every week, and he would go see his therapist, and the therapist would remind him of all this. And there was this incredibly uh, toxic. It appeared toxic to me. I was just managing the home, so I wasn't involved in the direct therapeutic treatment of my clients, but I was making sure they were receiving good therapeutic care by professionals. And every week, this kid would come home and he would flip over the table, like just those chairs, break
right.
glasses. And he normally would do that when the rest of the kids were there and the other staff was there. Well, one Wednesday afternoon, he came in and I was the only one there. And so he walks in screaming profanity, flipped the table over. And I went out and I said, "Hey, buddy, I'm the only one here. I don't know who this is for, but it's just me, you know." And
Mm.
he goes, "Every time I talk to this therapist, they tell me about, and I have to talk about what happened to me." And I said, I agree. I don't see where that's very valuable. And he goes, "And you don't know what it's like." And I go, I really don't. And I said, and it's something that I regretted saying at first. And it was my instinct talking, not an education, not a sort of an educated stance, but it was my instinct talking. And I said, "Hey, let's say his name was John."
Yeah.
I said, "John," I said, "I'm going to say something that might be wrong, and I'm not a therapist, and I apologize if it's wrong." He said, "But from my perspective, the animal that molested you, it's horrible. He's in jail. He's gone. He's in jail for 30 years. He'll never see the light of day, and it will never be right. But the only person molesting you right now is you in your brain." And that sounds harsh, but you're reliving this over and over. And I don't agree with your therapist running this through every single week with no resolution. And of course, he told me to F off, and he went to his room, and I was like, "Okay, I probably really screwed that up." You know what I mean? And uh, uh, I actually sort of told our clinical director what I'd done. She goes, "That's probably not the best thing to say, but you didn't do any more damage. It's already done to this kid. So so anyway, life happened. My events happened. This kid moved on to another home. I lose track of the kid. I have a lot of stuff go wrong in my life. So many years later, I get a email from I didn't recognize, but it was from a university, a Texas university. Um, and I'm like, I don't know anybody there, but I recognize the name. And let's say it's, again, John so-and-so
Sure.
at University of Texas.edu. And I'm like, "Oh my God, who is this, the guy?" I mean, because this is years later.
Right.
And so he sent me an email, said, "Do you remember me?" And he told me his name. And I go, "I do." And he said, "Can I call you?" And, at the time, I'm easy to find on the internet, so it wasn't hard to find me. And I go, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, "Oh boy, this kid's about to just grown man now is about to go off on me." And
Mm.
so he called me, and I said, "How you doing?" He says, "Well," he said, "I'm going to University of Texas." And he said, "I'll get to that in a minute." And he said, "I just wanted to I said, I probably know what you want to talk about. And I was like preparing, I said, look,
Yeah.
I really am sorry if I said anything that was upsetting to you back then. And he goes, no, in fact, he said, do you remember what you said to me? I go, I've never forgotten what I said. And I always didn't know if I was right or wrong. He goes, well, I didn't like it. Over the years, over time, I realized there's nobody that ever had the courage to tell me what you're right. I had to let go of this. I have to get to the point of, solution mode. I had to get to a point of action mode. I'm stuck in this victim mode, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life being medicated to get away from these horrible memories that this animal did to me, or I can figure out an action. And he said, that's why I'm at the University of Texas. I'm studying to get my medical degree, and I want to be a psychiatrist to work with kids that were sexually abused. And he
Wow.
said, I have an inside information on that I think could bring help to those that have been suffering with that. So he said,
Yeah.
that was one of the strongest things. He said, I've been to therapy for years and years and years, and nobody ever told me that. And it does sound harsh when you say it, but it was so true. And you said it so kindly, and you did. He said, it's a message that I will incorporate going forward. At some point, everybody has to deal with what happened to them. And I thought that was so profound that this young man who the action to make something, it is never a good thing that anybody goes through what this kid went through, but
Sure.
he did. And so his response to it is, let me use that fuel to let me help other kids that one day will maybe have the right therapy that will help them speed up their process as well. That's been many years ago. He's a medical doctor doing exactly what he says. He has a practice in California. We stay in touch frequently, and he's currently writing a book. And
Wow.
when he do, we're going to have him on the show, and he will promote his
Fabulous.
book. But
Yeah.
this is such a profound concept that a lot of people are going to be like, oh, that sounds pretty harsh, but we do that to ourselves. I know I work with people who are 25 years old, 20, 22, 23, 24, that their whole message every week is, but my mom and dad, they sent me to boarding school when I was 12. They did all these things wrong. That's what, my message is to keep shifting them from, you're not wrong, but the relevance of that is that if you're stuck there, we're never going to be able to move on. So blame keeps you stuck in the historical event. It keeps you from taking action and accepting responsibility to take the actions needed to change. And that's a long answer to your question, but that's what I think about blame.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I think that it does a really nice job of underlining what I was saying, which is that I have trouble understanding what the value of blame is, because I always want to find the value in everything. And that one's a tough one for me. Like I said, the best one I've come up with is, well, it's a great indicator of where I don't want to be. But boy, that's a tough one, because like you say, when you're in that blame state, you're stuck, and you're not going anywhere. The one thought that did come to my mind, maybe this is something, you tell me whether or not you think this is something. The one thought that did come to my mind is that different people seem to need to repeat, I'll call them traumas for the lack of a better term. It can be something as severe as what this guy went through, but it could also be a much more mild trauma. It could be any kind of negative situation. People seem to have different levels, or not levels, different quantities of bad stuff they have to go through before they're finally willing to shift off of it. And maybe I'm not right about that, but it just seems like some people, it seems like they can get it the first time. Some people can get it after 2 or 3 times. Some people take 20 times, and it's very confusing. And there's a part of me that rebels against it. It just is revulsed by the whole idea of somebody wanting to continuously subject themselves to being in that horribly stuck state, and yet that seems to be what happens.
Well, a lot of times it's reinforced by events or I know families of blame where when in my household growing up, I never ever heard one time, and this is it's not a bad thing. Nobody in my household growing up ever said was I was wrong about that.
Mm.
We would argue when I was wrong, I would argue. If I just defended the position, even when I knew I was wrong, just because nobody in our house says you're wrong. So there is cultural, there's stuff that takes place in families where the blame is always, well, yes, I might have done this, but this worse event caused me to, is not as, or that comparison of blame. And whatever happens, there are some people people hopefully get to a place when they realize the cycle of blaming, no matter how many times you have to just reboot that, you hopefully get to the place of, I'm never going to get satisfaction, even if the person admitted to me that they were totally wrong. How are we going to fix that today?
Right.
What do we do with that? And one of my very first clients, when I went in private practice, I've shared this several times. It was a female who, probably about at the time 50 years old, and she was going to see a psychiatrist every week. And for 12 or 15 years, I forget, but I think it was 12 years actually. 12 years, every single week. And they were trying to figure out, did her father molest her or not?
Mm. Yeah, I remember this story.
And so she came to me and I said, well, I don't know what you want me to do with that. She said, well, actually, Dr. Master, who was my mentors, I contacted him and he said, that's something that I would be able to help you with. And I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to be able to help with here? And he said, you're going to need a plan, and Joel can help you get a plan of how to move forward with this. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm sorry that this may have happened to you, but it seems to me for 12 years, the question of it, the searching for blame, yes or no, is creating the problem. It's really no longer the event. And she's like, well, maybe. And I said, so again, going to sound harsh. Why don't we just pick a side and we go forward? It almost doesn't matter which side, but we're going to have to get to resolution stage. And if we're stuck in constant search of blame and assigning of blame, you're delaying your life. For 15 years. You have been stuck in this process. It's not serving you. It's not healthy. And again, it sounds harsh, and she didn't like it. She bristled when I said pick a side. But when we sort of did, it's when we were able to move on. If we're able to move past, and then we can deal with it as if it did happen. And that's sort of the side we went with. So your father's dead, your mother's dead. Any collaborating evidence is totally gone. So if we're going to accept that this happened when you were 8, as you seem to remember, then what do we do with that now, instead of the weekly back and forth of did he or didn't he? Because he was such a nice man. He didn't do it later. He didn't do all these other things. I said, see, that debate, that intrusive thought that you have going on about this constant debate of blame is keeping you stuck. So again, the blame is a sticking mechanism. It is what, and it is reinforced, as I was saying during my original monologue, in the beginning. It's reinforced with traditional therapists today of, well, none of this is your fault, and it's certainly not your fault that it happened. But when you say it's not your fault, you're automatically saying, but you have no remedy other than just blame, and blame is not a remedy. Blame should be a call to action. It should be origin based. This is what happened. I can place blame on the originating thing here. I want to now move on. And that's what I always try to do with my clients. And that's not where that, again, it's just 2023, and people, it goes a different way now.
Yeah, I hear you. And let me throw something else in there and see what you think of it. When you talked about how the therapists are trying to help people to understand it's not their fault. When I hear that phrase, I bristle at that phrase. And I bristle at it because the implication behind it is the first thing we have to do is find who's at fault.
Yes. Yeah.
And the reason I bristle at it is I ask why. I mean, I understand the emotional need. I understand.
Sure.
I've certainly experienced that emotional need to want to blame somebody. But from a therapeutic viewpoint, the question I ask is, why is that so important? The only
Well,
answer that I can think of that has, in conversations I've had with therapists and coaches and so forth over the years here on the program, is if you can identify an emotion that has been haunting you for some time, and you can allow yourself to feel it all the way through until it dissipates, you can release it. So from that perspective, I can understand, I can appreciate
yeah,
that. But
yeah,
when I hear somebody say, well, you're not at fault, there's an implication along with it that says somebody else is.
right.
And that's the part
And,
I don't understand. Why is it so important to say that somebody else is from a therapeutic viewpoint? I can understand from the emotional viewpoint if I want to blame somebody. I get that. But from the therapeutic viewpoint, that's the part I don't get. Why would the therapist even want to bring that up in the first place?
well, it's one of those. I have, first of all, I don't have an answer to your question, but
I didn't think
it's
you did.
pretty.
I'm
Yeah,
posing a ridiculously
yeah,
crazy
yeah,
question in that sense.
yeah. It's like, when my son Justin and I had a discussion, I don't know, a year or two ago about a motorcycle,
Hmm.
and I told him I will not buy him a motorcycle, and he said, "Why?" I said, "Because I have known multiple people that have been killed on motorcycles, and I cannot have you at higher risk. I lost a child in a car accident. I'm I can't stop you when you get your own job from buying a motorcycle, but I am not going to buy it when you want." And he goes, "Well, Dad, it's very seldom the motorcycle driver's fault." And I said, "But that doesn't help with dying. The result that it's not that oh, you're not to blame, but you're still dead. So it's that
Hmm.
my concept is it's much more dangerous regardless of whose fault it is. We
Hmm.
we oh, when something happens, an event, somebody bombs a building, one of the first things we do, we must find out all origins. We launch multiple committees, before the smoke clears. We're Yeah, of course we need to know who it is to decide what we're going to do politically, but we have developed into, we must know who did this, whose fault is this, so we can do the stuff we do attached to that. And from a therapeutic standpoint, you can get it. It doesn't offer a lot of value. If you're talking about the idea, as I did with my two cases, it's certainly good to understand. My and this is a really important point. I've worked with a lot of sexual abuse victims, and there is never a moment that I blame my clients for these horrid acts. You know that.
Sure.
There's never a moment. It is not their fault the act happened. They did zero to it. It's zero. I don't. It's knowing that. However, as I keep saying, at some point in the process, when we're healed enough from the traumatic event of this evil, then we're healed enough to then take action to fix you, not because of it's somebody else who's, regardless of fault, we have to repair ourselves. We have to be able to move on. That's the sort of that growth mindset model. What happens is ours to repair, regardless of the origins of what caused it to break. It's really
Yeah.
important.
I like that. I like the way you describe that. It's bringing to mind a conversation I had with a guest from what from the perspective of this show is yesterday's show or the last show. I actually did it 3 hours ago, but with that guest after we were done, as so often happens with these things, we did a little conversation after the show, me, her, and Anne Marie, and in the course of that conversation, we kind of got into the conversation about good and evil, particularly from a vibrational perspective, and identified that. I mean, she made it very clear, good and evil both exist in the world. And when I kind of pinned her down on what exactly that meant, she clarified that by evil, she meant those who are living in an extremely low vibrational place. And I think about this whole question of good and evil existing in the world, and how do we deal with it? How do we handle it? I think of it from the point of view of it's a low vibrational state. So why do we choose to live a low vibrational state? Well, we come into this world of contrast. We come into this what they call a duality or a contrast or polarity. Good and evil, white and black, right and wrong, dark and light. All the different ways we can express that kind of thing, which means we're here to experience all of it. And I have to admit, this still is hard for me to get my brain around. Why on earth would I want to come into this world to experience trauma? And I can't think of a good answer for that. And there are different opinions about that. But what I do know is this. we do experience it, regardless of whether we chose to or not. We do experience it. It's there. So it almost doesn't matter what the epistemology of it is. What matters is, what are we going to do with it? And that's really
I
what
agree.
you're addressing. What are we
Yeah.
going to do with it?
Well, I have experienced a bit of trauma along the way,
Yeah,
and
I'd say.
yeah, and while certainly not something I would ever want to do again, I also I can appreciate, the growth I had from trauma, the resilience that I've gained, the strengthening I've had from, various traumas. And while I can't imagine based on my human brain that I'm using today, that I could imagine choosing this life that these events would have happened. However, if I'm thinking from a more metaphysical standpoint, if this is one of 18 million lives that I've lived and I've chosen a bunch of different ones, I want to try it all. I want to try everything. And that would just be one of the flavors on the menu, so to speak.
Which says something about us.
If you look,
I think you're right. I think we all tend to do that. We have enough of these
well,
lifetimes that we live. We're gonna try it all. We want all flavors.
well, yeah. Again, I use this. We talked about this topic before. I've used this concept. When you go to the big amusement parks, you don't ride the merry-go-round for excitement. You go on the big boys.
Well, it depends what your age is, but I get your point.
Well, I don't know what age you're, but my age, we go on the big boys.
Oh, I'm thinking like 2 or 3 year olds.
Well, I mean, we can, I get that. But like the Hulk roller coaster have you ever ridden that at Universal Studios?
I have not. No, I'm actually not much of a roller coaster fan.
Okay. So this is an amazing roller coaster that you go up. And as you're going up, the first time you ride it, you're unaware of this. And usually the roller coasters hit the peak and then they gain speed when they go down. Well,
Right.
about halfway up, this rockets up to 60 miles an hour on the way up.
Wow.
So you're thrown back, then it goes over the hill, and you go through a series of incredibly tight loops, and and you're just like, and it's amazing. But while it's going on, it's just like, oh my gosh. So I want to ride that the first time I get to Universal Studios. That's the first ride I want to ride. It's also the one with the biggest line because it's the most exciting ride. So when we break down, and this is when we break down all this stuff we're only using our human brains and consciousness, that we're the limited consciousness that we have to really understand all this. So we can't have these metaphysical answers with these limited access brains. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I've run into that barrier many times. There are a lot of things I just can't seem to understand because I just don't have enough processing power.
Right, but once again, my belief system is once you're sort of rejoined, you transition and you rejoin with source energy, you have access to everything. And again, I know my personality, at least in this lifetime, and I can't imagine. Yeah, I can just see me just jumping right back in. Let's go do the next crazy thing, Joel. I mean, I see that happening. I'm the guy that just keeps jumping back in, and because I despite everything that has happened, and I think you get this, I really love to live. I mean, I'm not just kidding. I love living. I savor living. I love my life, and the good, the bad, and the ugly all were necessary, and I love all of it, but because it got me here. So I think that question, if we're ever transition to the other side, we'll have that conversation one day, Walt. We have bigger brains.
Oh, okay. Of course, by that time, maybe we've already transitioned, so we'll have unlimited access to brain power.
So, we won't even need to ask the question.
It'll be just obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I'm also, I find that it's a challenging topic from the point of view of, like I said, it's so easy to feel the desire for blame. It's so easy to feel the desire for I was wronged, and I want. It's almost like we want somebody to recognize we were wronged, and say you're completely right to have felt wronged.
Yeah.
And when you say it that way, it sounds so weird, but really that's the way it feels.
Well, I think we all want to be reinforced. If I have probably been 2 years ago, this lady I was dating, and we had the event where we broke up, And
Mm.
shockingly, she thought I went to the gym too much was the starting conversation.
Can't
I don't know where
imagine where that one came from.
I don't know
Yeah.
where that came from.
No.
And so anyway, it just was, and it wasn't, I wasn't, I thought it was a pretty casual relationship. She was getting, so the whole lot to it. So anyway, we had a conversation and we agreed to, it was very calm. There was no yelling. I value that period of time. I wasn't
Mhm.
willing to go further, make a deeper commitment, and she was looking for that. So we parted ways.
Sure.
So
Okay.
then found she started going, we had a lot of mutual friends. So she started going to her friends saying, telling the story from her side, and then
Sure.
seeking reinforcement from her friends that am I right?
Mhm.
You know, and then if, and likely was probably what are they going to say? Yeah, you're right. And so that actually got me into a place when one of our joint friends tried to talk to me about it. Then I then told my side of the story, looking to sort of rally the troops to my side.
Right.
And all of that was such an exercise in futility, but it felt really needed, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
It
It
does,
felt
exactly.
like
Yeah.
I really, yeah, yeah. And of course, my logical brain is going, none of this matters. But yet the need to do that. And I finally got to the point where it felt like middle school. And I finally just said, I have huge respect and care deeply for her. Our situations didn't match and we moved on. That just became my standard answer. And no
Mm.
matter what, well, she said this. And I was like, well, she's entitled to her opinion. I'm entitled to mine. And I just want to move forward. So, but it's amazing how it just felt so necessary to defend my position and sort of readjust the blame, so to speak, on her when we just really weren't matching on what we wanted. This is two human beings that had a different vision of what going forward looked like.
Exactly. Yeah, that nails it right there. In fact, you're you're reminding me of something. There was a book that came out about, I'm going to say 10 years ago, by the former NBA basketball player Charles Barkley,
Mm.
and I love the name of the book because it hits spot on with what we're talking about here. The name of the book was "I May Be Wrong, but I Doubt
Yeah,
It."
yeah, I love it.
I mean, does that summarize it or what? That summarizes that feeling. I may be wrong, but I don't think so.
Well, when friends break up, I'm on the other side, and because I do what I do for a living, people want to talk to me, and I'm, and especially when it's two friends that I know that break up, I'm trying to be diplomatic. I'm trying to be supportive, and trying to, well, this happened and this happened, and and this he always did this or she always did this, and I'm like, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but and I'm trying to get more to you're broken up. Let's not damage things any further by really trying to blow this up and make it worse. But yet there's a
Mm,
need to, well, you don't know half the things she did. And I go, I don't.
mm,
I wasn't there. But to be honest with you, it's not really none of my business. And
mhm.
this need to throw the other person under the bus. It's like, no, you were married to him for 7 years and everything was great. But now all of a sudden they didn't just come out. Your perspective has changed, and what was something you would tolerate before, now you're using it to sort of rally the troops against him. And there is a lot of that. It's just its opinion is part of this weird social awkwardness that we have as humans to be right,
Mhm.
to make sure we have the committee with us to be right. It's
Right. Yeah.
and if it's like we're empowered by the numbers of people seeing that. It's like that's why
Mhm.
blame helps. Well, again, one of the brilliant moves and here clearly this is a move that he did. I'm not calling him a brilliant man by any means, but when Donald Trump got in the press, he blamed the Mexicans. Um, every single problem was the Mexicans' fault, and it's like he's right, and it got attention. It's those Mexicans did all this, and it's just like what they did. I mean, but it's so many people, and then his campaign became one of blaming everybody, and then but I'm the only one that has your back, so come on with me. And it was one of the more it's one of the non-traditional really super effective campaigns that I've ever seen happen. It's just
Oh
because
yeah.
he led into the blame. He used blame as a tool. He psychologically sort of modified it by not just blaming but doubling down on the blame over and over and over and over again. And it's like we as humans secretly don't want that. We say we don't want it, but deep down we crave that blame.
Yeah, it's true. In fact, I've mentioned this about Trump before. It's one of the more fascinating things about his personality, his psychology, from my perspective. It's that now Trump has no problem, crossing borders. And I don't mean the borders to Mexico. I mean like boundaries. He
Yeah,
doesn't have any trouble doing that, and he also has a tendency to get in trouble because of that. But he has an amazing faculty for deflecting. And the way he
yeah,
does it is really instructive. He will identify when he's about to be accused of something. It could be illegal, it could just be immoral, it could be undesirable, it could be something that just his opponents don't like. It doesn't make any difference. But he's going to be blamed for something. He gets wind of it and he blames his opponent for the exact same thing. Now,
yeah.
the really interesting part is 9 times out of 10, the opponent actually never did the thing.
Right.
But the action of blaming him for it or her, blaming the opponent for it, sets it up so that when he starts getting blamed, he can point to his opponent and say, yeah, but what about my opponent? And the really odd part about it is, like I said, it doesn't really matter whether the opponent actually did it. The fact that he set it up in advance creates this aura that, well, if they can do it, I can do it, which
Sure.
it's a red herring. It actually never really existed, except that he created it. But it's a phenomenal use of the tool. Now, is it one that I advocate? Absolutely not. I think you're crazy if you follow that particular route. But I have to give him credit, man. He
Yeah.
uses that one to perfection.
Yeah. And using the blaming and grouping people together and just saying all this and then it becomes you get people that really, well, he's right. I mean, everything that is wrong with our country today is clearly the Mexicans' fault. So and
Yeah.
you're going, wait, what? I mean, how did they give us a $30 trillion debt? I don't know. I mean, it made no sense, but yet at the end of the day, he was really good at that. And
Mm.
it's because society, just like we like negative news, we also it's very important to assign blame. If you, even in civil cases where you're suing somebody for money, there's percentages of blame. So the jury will decide, okay, Walt, you're 51.6% of blame in this case, and
Mm.
Joel, you're the remainder. It's like, wow. I mean, we even have percentages of blame, and it's just randomly
Yeah.
based on stuff. But it's just,
Yeah.
again, it's just embedded in what we do, and blame tends
Mhm.
to it's almost relieving in some way. Well, this happened, so here we go. And
Mhm.
it's not my fault because clearly this is this person's fault. And it's like, okay, but it's much more than that. But blame is a way. Getting stuck in blame from a psychological standpoint is so damaging. And kids that grow up in blame-based households, they are never able to accept responsibility. They are never able to. My oldest son TJ, he really never lied too much. He was exceptionally blunt. I mean, he would just say stuff. It's like, wow,
Mhm.
bro, you probably should have lied to me about that. I mean, he would say. Then my son Chris came along, and Chris wasn't capable of telling the truth. Everything was, he could eat the last cupcake in front of you, going, I didn't eat that. I mean,
Mm.
he could do that. And then Justin came along, and Justin figured out something pretty quickly. Justin realized if I asked him, did he do something? His initial reaction might have been to lie, but he realized if you just accept responsibility, minimum to no consequences. you know,
Aha.
the lying about it's going to, So he was really good about, yep, I did that. And then it's just like, okay, well, that's great, son. Don't do that again. Is usually my response. Let's don't do that
Mm.
again. And he learned that. So even to this day, he's really honest with me because he understands in our household, it is, I honor truth. I honor self-responsibility. I honor honesty. And
Mhm.
he sort of, he's hacked my parenting skills. He understands.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is. I
Yeah.
mean, there are lots of different ways to get to the desired end game. He found a really easy way to get there.
Yeah. It's like, because I'm thrown off guard. Like, did you do this? Yes, I did. Sorry. Oh, well,
So much for
I
that
don't,
soliloquy. What
yeah,
am I going to do
okay.
now?
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, let's don't do that again. Okay. And he usually
Yeah.
doesn't do it again. It's just like, well, I'm running out of, it isn't this big thing, and but it also, and I've always told them the being honest is that I honor that more than anything. So if there is a consequence, most likely, I mean, it's going to be so much less than the denying and all the stuff, and also I told them all three. If I ask the question, it's almost 99% sure I already know the answer.
There's an interesting parallel to this as I'm thinking about it, and it's not a connection I made before, but for some reason it's coming into my head at this point. It's actually not all that different from the way the legal system works.
Yeah.
If a person is accused of a crime and they just plead guilty and say, "Yeah, I did it," it's almost a certainty they're going to get a lesser sentence. Almost a certainty. But if they declare not guilty, go to trial, and then get found guilty, they're going to get hit with a harsher sentence. And
Yes.
I think I'm pretty sure the law is actually deliberately structured that way, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Right. The when I was charged with when I stole money from the company I worked with when I was in the middle of my gambling addiction, and I was charged with felony theft. I was arrested, and I went before the judge, and you can plead guilty or not guilty at a public defender. The standard procedure is to plead not guilty and then work out a plea deal and then plead guilty. That's what they normally do. So when I was arrested, I was so exhausted from everything. I go into that session. Again, I got a public defender there. I never met him before that day, and so he leans over and he says, "Just say not guilty." And I looked at him and I go, and I didn't say anything to him. So the lady said, the judge, said, "Mr. Elston, you've been charged with felony theft. Do you understand the charges?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "How do you plead?" I said, I plead guilty, Your Honor." There was silence. My attorney's like, "Can I have a moment with my client?" And I'm like, "Your Honor, I don't need a moment with him." I said, "I'm guilty of the charges." And she was taken back. She said, "Mr. Elston, you don't have a plea deal in place, or I'm going to really encourage you to reconsider your plea and make sure your rights are protected." And I'm going, I have lived with this gambling addiction for so long. I've ran from it. Everything I'm accused of, I did. I'm the one that confessed to my employer. I don't want to take another moment. And she said, "Do you realize I could put you in jail for 5 years?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I do." And she's like, "Wow, I've never had this happen." So she basically said, "I'm going to give you 30 days, and I'm going to put you on probation for 3 years, and you're going to pay this back. And if you don't pay it back, you're going to come back before me. But I think you'll get it paid back. You seem like a man of integrity." And that was it. And I got 30 days, which I can't imagine have gotten any better. But I wasn't doing it for that. I was just sick of running. I just said, "Let me own this. I've ran my whole life at that point. Let me just own it and see what happens."
How interesting, too, her comment that you seemed a man of integrity.
Yeah, after I plead guilty to theft.
Which was probably about the last thing that you were feeling.
Yes, it was not my best day, by the way, Walt. Not my best day.
No, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a piece of me that just thinks that must have gone down well hearing that from her.
It was, and it was not my intent to manipulate, but it's certainly something that was very helpful, because she was, and my attorney goes, "Man, I have never," he said, "That's never do that again." He said it worked out great for you, but she must have, she said she did appreciate the honesty. And well, I said again, I wasn't doing it for any other reason than I'm guilty. I am 100% guilty. There's no,
Yeah.
and I've said there's nobody else to blame. He wanted to talk about my gambling addiction. I go, no, that's not a thing for this. I did it. I still did it. I'm a sound mind. I stole the money. It's my problem.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was weird. Very weird.
Well, but
uh,
it's weird, but it's also that I can't help but notice the health that was in there. Health was coming through, and you got it reflected back to you.
yes.
You didn't intend to. It was certainly not your mindset to try to, like you said, manipulate or anything like that. It was just, pure honesty, blunt honesty was coming out. And yet in that blunt honesty, you were getting something that you really needed.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. That was, as you've heard me talk, that was a turning point in my life. That
Right.
event, being charged and being and pleading guilty. It was that day forward where it's time to. I'm going to live life like I should be living life, and so all of that led to it. And it again, it's one of those weird things that happen. But I don't want to go stand in front of a judge again charged with the crime. But I'm glad
No.
it happened. I really am glad it happened.
Well, it leads me to another thought, which is we were talking earlier about how someone who is seeking to blame is looking for a way to gain validation. Like you said, get their team on their side.
Right.
And as you were describing that earlier, I thought it was spot on, first of all. But it also occurred to me it's a rather thin level of nutrients. I
Yes.
mean, yeah, you can get somebody on your side, but it feels a little better. It doesn't really fix anything. It doesn't really feel a whole lot better, but you do get a little bit of validation out of it.
Right.
And it occurs to me also, well, if that's what we're looking for is a validation, what happens if we get a real validation? That's what you got in that courtroom with that judge. You got a real
Yeah.
validation.
Yeah.
And it was out of the blue, which probably was the
Yeah.
best kind.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, when all that was going on, Walt, I was in my mindset. It took me a while to review all that and find value in it.
I'm
There,
sure.
yeah, you're standing there and you just pled guilty to a felony. That's again not your best moment. But as I reflected and looked at what she said, I was like, that was her. That was about as good as a compliment she can give somebody who just pled guilty to a felony in her courtroom for stealing, of all things.
Yeah. 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 I think the reason I'm tying these together is I'm wondering if that becomes a way out for somebody who's in a blame cycle. I wonder if there's the possibility that someone who's in a blame cycle can understand that if they're willing to take a step outside the blame cycle, they can actually get the validation they're looking for in a much bigger way than they could through the blame cycle.
And that's the concept of radical acceptance, a radical, just radical responsibility, self-responsibility. That's I didn't mean to practice that day, but there were mitigating factors. There are other things going on, but at the end of the day, I am solely responsible. I am the one that's at fault here. I'm going to stand up and take this. And at that point, I had nothing going in life at that point anyway. I was, had nowhere to, living in a halfway house with no money and no job. So, going to jail wasn't super scary compared to not having much else. So, uh, uh, but it's at the same time, it was, I believe, just that taking responsibility, radical acceptance of whatever life's bringing you, I think is the way out of blame thinking. To me, it's the solution. When you can spend all this energy with, yes, here's going on, this is going on. At the end of the day, I did this or I did that, regardless of why. I can make a case. I have a lot of addiction in my family. I have a lot of mental illness. I grew up in a very traumatic childhood. I started gambling out of response to all that, blah, blah, blah. And that's all true. All that's very true. So I can stand
Sure.
from the court and say, Your Honor, I became a compulsive gambler because of the dysfunction. I could tell the stories, and you say, well, that's what a horrible thing to go through. But at the end of the day, I still stole the money, and one doesn't offset the other to me. And the trying to spread blame around from all that, when I am the one that made the choice, even though I was in a terrible mindset, I was never lacking awareness of what I was doing. I was not actually thinking I was stealing. I was planning on putting it back when I wanted the money, but that's clearly not going to happen. It had never happened, so it's clearly not going to happen now. But yet, just owning that, and also what it instilled in me since then is I value straightforward honesty now. I put great value in just honesty. It led me to a place of I just tell the truth. I don't. It's so much better to tell the truth. It's just I don't need to quantify or say, well, I promise or this. Back in the day when I was in the middle of my addiction, lying all the time to get money and stuff, I swear to God, or I'll put my hand on the Bible. I'd say anything to get the money. My answer right now is yes or no. That's it. That's it. And it is. And period. Will you do this? Yes. Will you not do? I won't do it, or one or the other. But no matter what, I just say what it is.
For someone who is stuck in that blame cycle, then, and you're proposing this idea of radical responsibility, because I know that's what you do with your clients for sure, and other people that you try to help.
Sure.
When you're trying to help them, first of all, come to grips with this idea of radical responsibility, but also take the steps to get there. What are the steps? How do you get, for somebody who's actually willing to consider on some level the possibility of being willing to try to step out of blame? What are the steps for getting out?
Well, my method with anything is rapport building. I got to start with building a rapport with my clients where they trust me. They know I have their best interest at heart, because you can't go from just day one getting on this concept. Then I need to allow them to tell me their blaming story. I still have to allow that to take place in the process. And then here, well, I'm this way today because my mom mismanaged my medication when I was younger, even though the doctor prescribed that. So I have a young man who's addicted to Adderall, and he's 28, and every month he goes and gets his Adderall filled, while complaining to be addicted to it and blaming his mom because she put it on him when he was 12. But he picks it up every month himself now and takes it and complains about being addicted to it. And I said, and he goes, but it's my mom's fault. She started it. Your mom listened to the doctor when you were 12, did what the doctor said. That did start it. But you're 27 years old and you're picking it up voluntarily every month. The ability to blame your mom, that the time of expiration is over. You're choosing it now. And you have to walk them through the process of uncoupling the blame. The blame gives them the origins, as I said earlier. Then you try to uncouple that and say, but here we are today. And it's a hard leap sometimes.
Yeah. But it's a necessary one.
Yeah.
Because like you pointed out, the first time it was somebody else, all the other times it was you. Which, by the way, is a hard thing to face.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it's no matter what you try to, this is my fault or this isn't my fault, or people will do things. People can victimize you. People can do all kind of things. But when your response keeps being the same thing, it's a really hard break. So being able to say, I created this situation. My mindset was formed in addiction and mental health issues and all the other stuff. And that led to it's nice to know all of that. It's not nice to know. I know what I need to fix is I need to deal, since here's the answer to, going back to one of your questions. What does blame do? For in my case, when I say blaming led for me to discover, which then I said, okay, the origins of my family's problem is addiction and mental illness. Let's start with that. So I'm not holding that onto my problem, but I am going to no longer be addicted. I'm going to recover from my addiction. I'm going to stop my anxiety. I'm going to arrest my anxiety, and I'm going to defeat my depression. So identifying the origins allowed me to defeat the underpinnings of the dysfunctional relationship that my family had developed with all of those things. You often see posted on Facebook, and I post this often myself, these generational cycles of dysfunction need to stop somewhere, and they're going to stop with me. So identifying that I was brought up in all of that silliness, and I can get angry about it if I would allow myself to talk about. I'm baffled that I am sitting in the kitchen watching these things take place over and over again, and nobody realizing there's a 6-year-old here, guys. I mean, can we not,
yeah.
Can we not threaten to kill each other or hold a gun to anybody's head tonight? Just maybe. But it is not what I do. There's no child of mine or any child that I could even remotely affect that would ever be exposed to that, because I would never allow it. And if I were to find it, I would break it. I would stop it. So again, I look to that, and while not optimal for me, all I can do with it is acknowledge that happened and then fix the underlying, with the depression, anxiety, and all the other stuff that I went through, and then help others, as I do in my career all the time, to help others see that and not allow that to happen, right now to my kids. When I say my kids, my clients and people I work with,
Sure.
We're going to break that. One of my clients is not going to call and say, my grandfather's beating my grandmother up in the living room, Joel, what do I do? I mean, if I get that call, I'm like, the police are there in 3 minutes and I'm coming too. So pray the police get there before I do.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, but we would break that cycle, and I've had that. I've had a similar thing happen to my client telling me, my dad, his dad is a drunk, and he's a very high functioning drunk. Nobody knows he's a drunk in town, but he goes on a rage every night, and the kid's 14, and having to put up with that every single night. And his mom said, you can't tell anybody, your dad could lose his job. And so one night he was 14, the guy came downstairs and said, I'm going to beat your ass if you don't do something. He goes, and I'm about to call 911. Let's see who wins. And the kid just stood up to him, said, we're not spending another night in the house with a drunk. I'm calling 911, or you're getting your stuff and getting out, and you and mom work this out. And the kid stood up to the little kid, stood up to his dad and held the phone in his hand and won. And
wow.
The dad went into treatment the next day. He went straight from denial to treatment. And this kid just stood right up to him and said, hey, this ends tonight. And literally told him those words. And it did. It ended that night.
Wow. That's impressive. Whoa. Yeah.
Well, he knew what that phone call would do. And he said, all I got to do is dial 911, let it ring once, and they're coming.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Once the connection gets made.
You don't. Yeah. And when you're CEO of a massive corporation in our town, you don't want the police showing up at your house without that.
Right.
And he knew that. The kid was smart enough to know that. And he literally forced his dad into recovery. Good story is that's been a few years ago, and dad's still in recovery. The kid's family's doing great.
That's fabulous. Wow.
Yeah.
What a great way to wind up the show today. Because I mean, this is a tough topic, and so I was glad that we were able to find a way to wind it up on a high note. Because it's a topic that we all deal with one way or another. A lot of people deal with it on a day-to-day basis. I feel pretty good about myself in that I have managed to get to the point in my own life where I don't do a lot of blaming anymore. I do a little bit, but not a whole lot. And I'm aiming to eliminate it as much as I can, because I know how toxic it is, and it's toxic on you. That's the worst part. You blame somebody. You're the one who suffers for it. You blame somebody else, and you suffer for
it. The best thing, the most important thing you can do for yourself is, and I know, again, this message doesn't hit well sometimes in 2023, but when you accept it is your responsibility for your mental health, for your safety, for your all that, everything is your responsibility. There's resources to assist you, but it's your responsibility to do that. There's no need for blame. I'm responsible for fixing me. And it is one of the most empowering things you can do to yourself, for yourself, is empower yourself with the no longer the need to blame.
Fabulous way to end the
conversation. One last thing as we wrap up. One last thing we wrap up. One of the things that I literally despise about the 12-step program in addiction treatment. You thought you were going to go the whole show without me being controversial, so sorry.
No, I know you too well.
Yeah. So the concept when they start talking about this is a disease, and I'm not really upset with that, because that was actually done for insurance purposes. But when you allude to this is not your fault, a condition, and your addiction is not your fault, but it's like, wait a minute, so whose fault is it? Who's going to be fixing this? It's like, a lot of times when you're like, well, I mean, if you do these steps, then going God will be fortunate enough to smile upon you and it'll be okay. But it doesn't work for everyone, but nonetheless, you're going to be dependent on these meetings forever and ever, or you'll relapse. It gets into a situation of it's about, well, you're broken and you can't be fixed, versus, yeah, you do have something going on. And if you want to call it a disease, you call it a disease. But it's sort of like type 2 diabetes. It's a disease, sort of, but it's a lifestyle disease. Go fix it.
Yeah.
It's fixable.
Right. Well, nice to know that we can actually fix things in life, and that it really actually can turn into something that's positive. So once again,
Absolutely.
thank you. This is another topic that came right off of your Facebook page. So once again, thank you for a great topic. And for some great insights.
Great show. Love having it. So yes.
And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.